Lafia, and welcome back to Black Love Free, a spiritual political podcast dedicated to Black spirituality, healing, and Black liberation. I am your host, Brendane, a Gemini, a reluctant anthropologist, a hoodoo, and a student of the Ifa, Orisha, Isheshe tradition, and an energy healer. I'm so excited about today's episode. It's one that's been brewing in me for months, honestly. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our founding Patreon members. Queen, Sequana Rose, Seka, and Ngozi, thank you so much for joining us. You can join our Patreon for free at the link in our bio. And if you decide you want to do a little more, throw some coin in there. Our paid members of our Patreon receive exclusive access to video episodes, extended episodes where I go more in depth on the topics that we discuss, behind the scenes footage, and more. So you can join a paid tier for as little as $1 a month. Only $1. And we'll be launching our book club soon. So be sure to join our Patreon so that you can receive updates on it. Today, we are talking about forgiveness, a necessary component of our self devotion practices. But this ain't the normal European Christian babble on forgiveness. We believe in being a menace to our enemies over here, okay? And in order to practice forgiveness without self betrayal or self abandonment, it's essential for us to get clear on what forgiveness is, what it ain't, and who it's for. And so we'll be doing this by looking at some philosophy today, as well as tussling with bell hook sisters of the Yam, Black women in self recovery. And we'll examine the forgiveness that matters most, self forgiveness. So let's get into it. So, as always, we want to start with a couple of deep breaths. We use these breaths to recalibrate our own meaning of forgiveness. I know for some of you listening, myself included, forgiveness has a lot of Christian programming to it. And so we're going to take some breaths to allow ourselves to have something new in the place of what we may have learned. So we'll start with an inhale and exhale. We're going to inhale again for 4. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do one more for good measure. Inhale, and exhale. So, as always, we start with the definition. And according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, forgiveness is the act of forgiving, which is, yeah, duh. And to forgive means to cease or feel resentment against an offender, i.e., to pardon. To give up resentment of or claim to requital, so something given in return, compensation, or retaliation. It also means to grant relief from payment of. So one might forgive their debts or have their debts forgiven, which is, what we all hope for folks who have student loans, that they just erase them shits. Medical debt, they just erase that shit off. Forgiveness also has a few synonyms as well. We'll lay those out for clarity's sake. And so those synonyms are to excuse, to condone, to pardon. And these synonyms are often what folks do when they say they forgive. They actually are excusing something, condoning something, or perhaps pardoning something. So, some folks believe that to forgive also means to exact neither punishment nor redress for a wrong. To excuse may refer to specific acts, especially in social or conventional situations, or the person responsible for these. So when we excuse something, like someone being late, right? We know that they're late, right? We say, okay, well, being late is wrong. But because you were caught in traffic, right? You have your excuse. We can excuse that you're late. We can look over that, right? When something is excused, it usually means that there are circumstances that are out of the person's control that facilitated or allowed for a particular behavior, right? Some extenuating circumstances outside their control. So then when we think about condone, right, as a synonym for forgive, we tend to see that a lot in society. And to condone implies that one is overlooking bad behavior, right? Behavior that is dishonest. Perhaps they are overlooking violent behavior. And this term may refer to a behavior or to the agent, right? The person that is responsible for it. Usually, when we condone something, that behavior or that person is doing some serious breach of moral, ethical, or legal code. So then we move to pardon. And pardoning someone implies that there is a penalty that is due for a specific offense they have, something that they've admitted to doing or have established that they've done. One might pardon a criminal from a crime. Trump pardoned, all those people who ran up on the White House or whatever. Pardoning is something that implies that you have power in a situation. And according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary as well, right? When we think about forgiveness alongside pardoning, condoning, or excusing, right? The main difference in forgiveness is that there's the inward change. And forgiveness implies that one gives up all claim to requital, to resentment, and to vengeful feelings. Many of us are familiar with forgiveness through a biblical sense. If you are someone who has practiced Christianity or currently practices Christianity, you might have a kind of flavor that you've long indulged in when you think about forgiveness. And so we can trace forgiveness in different ways throughout the Bible. And part of the reason why we start with the Bible is because of the ways that Judeo Christian values have shaped European culture, which shaped colonization, which shaped the culture in which we live today. So I'm specifically trying to pick apart what we understand about forgiveness from a colonial, Western, biblical sense in order for us to really choose the definition that serves us in our own self determination. So if we look at what the Bible says about forgiveness. We start in the Old Testament with the God Yahweh, who is the God of the Old Testament. And he was not fucking with nobody like that. Okay. He was only fucking with the Israelites. He wasn't doing nothing else with nobody. And he was not a very forgiving God, but he did have his moments. He had his moments, right? When we think about what Yahweh was doing, right? He was freeing the Israelites from Egypt. He was burning down cities. He was doing a lot of things in his name for his followers. But one thing that he asserted came into the world through disobedience by Eve and Adam in the garden, right, was sin. And so this is what they say about forgiveness in regards to sin in Micah 7:16-19. And it reads, nations will see and be ashamed, deprived of all their power. They will put their hands over their mouths and their ears will become deaf. They will lick dust like a snake, like creatures that crawl on the ground. They will come trembling out of their dens, and they will turn in fear to the Lord our God and will be afraid of you. Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy. You will again have compassion on us. You will tread our sins underfoot and hurl all our iniquities into the depths of the sea. And so, for folks who practice Christianity, right, it is long been asserted that sin came into the world and that separated us from Christian God. And so, in order for us to be reunited with that God, we need to be forgiven for our sins according to his terms. So, the Old Testament, Yahweh, God, had a particular understanding of forgiveness. That forgiveness was typically only offered to those who followed him, who were born of Jewish blood. But things shift a bit, right, when Jesus enters the scene in the New Testament. And Jesus taught an off reference parable on forgiveness. So, how many of us, by show of hands, my hands is up, have been likened to or likened ourselves to the prodigal son? If you're not familiar with the story of the prodigal son, I will share that here now. And we can find this story in the Bible. Yikes, I did not even include. So I had to look it up because I didn't include it in my notes. So the parable of the prodigal son is found in the Bible, Luke 15:11 through 32. In the beginning of this chapter, Jesus is doing his thing. He's trying to teach the folks different parables so they can, come to the same space that he is religiously. I'm not going to debate about Jesus in this episode, but essentially Jesus is out preaching to the crowds and teaching about this God that he loves and knows. And he continued. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. He was out there probably with the strippers. Oh no, what my pastors used to say that like he was out with the he was out with the girls. He was out here spending his money on the horse, is what she would say. But anyway, he had squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So he was so broke and destitute after spending his inheritance that he didn't have enough food to put in his stomach. He was going to eat with the pigs. And so when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" So he concocted his plan and he said, "I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to my father." But while he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And so they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. He'd been working his whole time in the field working. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him, "Yo, what's going on? What the hell is going on here?" And the servant replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours has squandered his wealth and your property with prostitutes and he bring his non-black ass home, you kill a fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so, what this story teaches us about forgiveness is one that is interestingly conditional, right? When it was preached to me as a young girl, as an adolescent, into my adulthood in the church, it's a story that the pastor told to bring those quote unquote lost sheep back. It was a story of this God's love, Christian God's love, his total forgiveness. You might be out here tricking in them streets, but you can always come home. But first, you must repent and admit that you're a sinner and bring your ass back. That's not the only condition for forgiveness, though, for this God, right? We can look at that through literally looking at the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6 starts in verse 9. Says, "Pray therefore in this manner: Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen." But then Jesus goes on after telling the prayer to explain that if you forgive others their trespasses, then Sky Daddy, your heavenly Father, will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you of yours. And so things start to pile up, right? In order to receive forgiveness from Sky Daddy, you not only have to repent from all your wrongdoing and come back, right? You also have to forgive those who hurt you and who harm you in order to receive his forgiveness, which you need to enter into heaven. And these are just a few of the passages that talk about forgiveness in the Bible, but to me, they clearly illustrate how Christianity is a colonizer religion, where we have this force, this divine being outside ourselves that determines when and how we access goodness in our lives through this nebulous form of forgiveness. And this forgiveness is something that you have to bestow to your enemy, even those who have shown that they are against you. It also really is confusing when you read and study the Bible because different things are happening in different parts of the Bible, which is part of the history of how it came to be, right? But the tying of one's own forgiveness from the Lord for their sins to their ability to forgive their enemies is a direct contradiction to the Psalms of David, who literally killed a man so that he could sleep with his wife. Well, he slept with his wife first and then he killed him because she got pregnant. But, anyway, that's the Old Testament drama. But David, even though he commits these quote unquote sins again and again and again, he is all up and through Psalms asking Yahweh to rain down justice on his enemies, right? Even the other writers of the Psalms, they're coming to their vengeful, jealous God saying, if you love us, if you really bout it, right? You see these people trying to kill me, you need to be taking them the fuck out. There is an about face in the New Testament there where it says, yes, God will fight your battles or whatever it is people be saying, right? Like God is the one who decides what vengeance looks like. But if we think about the utility of these teachings, where we move from asking God, Yahweh, to do what gods are supposed to do, which is back you the fuck up and beat your enemies down, right? To this benevolent God that just wants you to forgive and love even those who wrong you, even those who enslave you. Right? We go from the God of the Prince of Egypt that was raining down them damn pestilences and plagues to a God that says, if you don't forgive your enemy, I won't forgive you. It's quite clear why this would be advantageous for a colonizer? No. What better way to keep a people enslaved than to tell them to take up their injustices and their squabbles with a benevolent God who loves everyone the same, who forgives all sins the same, and who will avenge them, or at the very least, offer them a spot in a segregated heaven? There's also the inherent contradiction in asking a God without faults to forgive you for the faults that he created within you. The bottom line, or at least one of them, based upon what the Bible teaches about forgiveness and what influences our culture when it comes to forgiveness, is this sense of unworthiness. We ask to forgive because we would be separated from God without that forgiveness. And when we transpose that into the relationships with others, right? We forgive others so that God does not destroy us. We might even say, right, if we're going to stretch it out there, right, that we are approaching forgiveness with a sense of empathy. We forgive so that we may be forgiven. We forgive because we too are flawed and harm others. We may even forgive the undeserving because we prioritize restoring that relationship with them and with God, TM, right? So we forgive in order to be good, be akin to God, but a God that doesn't even practice forgiveness in that same way. God don't forgive his enemies. What if there's another way that we might think about forgiveness? If we think about forgiveness in the biblical sense, in the Western of Judeo-Christian sense of forgiveness, then we are going to be able to see it as a tool of control by a higher power. You are prohibited from accessing God's goodness and his salvation if you do not repent and ask for forgiveness, right? In some ways, God actually requires you to be better or more good than him. And if you really think about it logically, what sense does it make for a perfect, all knowing being, all loving being to feel resentment that would be necessary to requite, right? To let go of? What perfect being feels that kind of quote unquote negative emotion towards his creation? So much so that he requires his creation to atone for the nature that he gave them forever. This would also mean that forgiveness in this sense is for God to save you from the hell that he created for you. It is inherently self seeking. So we have this understanding of forgiveness that influences Western culture and the way that we practice and approach it. And it also brings us to this critical question that is really arisen in modern times around forgiveness. It's been bopping around in pop and therapeutic psychology and religious, usually Christian spaces. And so if we think of forgiveness in the most divine sense as something that is inherently self seeking, right, then it's not that big of a stretch for folks in pop and therapeutic psychology to state that forgiveness is not necessarily for the harm doer or the wrongdoer, but for the person who's been wronged. So we forgive, we release resentment, we let that resentment go for us. We don't do it for them. It's a bit confusing. I mean, the tism in me was trying to make sense of it, right? It is a bit confusing, but what is useful for us who are moving towards self-determination, who are thinking about how do we create a world by the means that we wish to fully live in the ends. It leads us to the question, who is forgiveness truly for? And so here is where I turn to Western philosophy to help us unpack this a bit more. And so I did some digging, did some reading. I was like, who's going to give me what I need to know about forgiveness here? And I found a review in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And in that review, honey, it's about 44 pages. I got it right here next to me. Um, Forgiveness is a highly contested concept purely for that question alone. Most think that forgiveness is inherently good, right? To forgive is good for community, it's good for oneself, it's good for the person who does harm. But how does forgiveness serve all of those different stakeholders and entities when they might have competing interests? How does forgiveness serve all of those entities when forgiveness might have competing or dangerous outcomes? And so I'll start with the abstract of the entry, and I'll be sure to leave this in the description for folks who are interested in reading. And it says, forgiveness is a triadic relationship between a wrong action, a wrongdoer, and a wronged victim. The victim forgives the wrongdoer for having done wrong. And by forgiving, a victim can move on from the wrong while still judging that it was a culpable wrong. It has been claimed that the core of forgiveness is the giving up of certain negative emotions towards the wrongdoer, or the forbearance of negative treatment of the wrongdoer, or the restoration of the relationship with the wrongdoer, or the alteration of the norms bearing on victim and wrongdoer. Much philosophical discussion of forgiveness centers on three primary questions. What is the nature of forgiveness? What must one do in order to forgive? What is the scope of forgiveness? When is one in a position to forgive? And which things can be forgiven? And what are the norms governing forgiveness? When is forgiveness morally good, right, or praiseworthy? And so, if you're a paid subscriber, you about to go with me on this deep dive here because it really had me at sometimes church stomping and clapping, really scratching my head when thinking about the different ways that philosophers approach writing, studying, and understanding forgiveness. And the reason why I think it's important to really go this deep into it is because too often we do not question what the fuck shit means, and we just say it and think that we're acting in certain ways that are morally good and morally just and right, whatever the fuck that even really means in this time. And it's important for us to know what the fuck we doing and why. And so once we unpack forgiveness, unpack the values around that, we can start to make self determined decisions around what a practice of forgiveness looks like for ourselves and for others. So, there are some that would claim that you can forgive someone and still punish them, meaning that you can release that resentment. You might release some negative feelings towards them, but you don't think differently or behave differently towards them. You still see them as someone who's done you wrong, and you treat them like somebody who did you wrong. You distance yourself from them. The relationship changes. And I find this view of forgiveness to be problematic mainly because it takes up an individualistic understanding of forgiveness that removes it from its relational underpinning, right? It makes forgiveness something that can be one sided, something that purely serves the person who's doing the forgiving. How does one forgive another for wrongdoing, release resentment, but still see them as a wrongdoer, and then continue to treat them, right, as such? So on the other side of that, if you were to construct a false binary, you're still forgiving this person, but that person has not apologized. That person has not repented. That person may even be dangerous. And the relationship with you doesn't change. The relationship they have with community doesn't shift or change. And there are times when this happens that this is actually morally wrong. And so that understanding of forgiveness really contradicts what folks will say about forgiveness is it being something that's always good. People treat it as a moral good, but what happens when you continue to forgive the same ain't shit nigga a non nigga and you don't shift their relationship with you or with the community? Does that still leave forgiveness as a moral good? Or does that actually make forgiveness morally wrong? And so they talk about it in the entry. They say, right, sometimes punishment or punitive resistance is necessary in order to ensure the safety of those that have been harmed and those in community with them. So it would seem, based upon this, that unconditional forgiveness would be detrimental to community and to self determination, right? Thinking of forgiveness as something that's always good to do, no matter the situation, is something that's actually dangerous to us, period. And so we have to let go of that self destructive and self important belief that forgiveness in itself is a universal moral good. And I offer to you today, in the spirit of fuck forgiveness, that we can replace forgiveness with something more, I guess, neutral might be the word, something more neutral. In my own life, I try to practice a kind of radical acceptance instead of forgiveness. Someone has wronged me. I locate the source of resentment and I make amends with the fact that I'm not going to get what I need or want from this toxic person. Oftentimes, we're told we have to forgive someone and release that resentment so that we can move on and live our lives and be happy and joyful in our lives. But I have found that being a hating ass bitch sometimes towards people who deserve it doesn't keep me from experiencing joy. It actually allows my joy to be more fully expressed because I have a good idea of who I can be in relationship with and who I can't be in relationship with. And for me, forgiveness is sacred. It's something that I only extend to people that I determine deserve it. And it always comes, how do I say this? It always comes these days in my ruthless self-devotion era. It always comes when someone has atoned, apologized, right? Demonstrated that they're willing to change their behavior. I don't forgive before that. Oftentimes, too, folks say that we must forgive so that we don't ruminate over situations. And so, what I found that radical acceptance allows me to do is to accept the fact that I'm not going to get what I need or want from a toxic person. I can accept them for who they are and how they've shown up in my life, but I don't have to release my resentment towards them because my resentment can be channeled into a poem. It could be channeled into something creative. It can just exist and be, right? And not eat at me. Because usually, what is attached to resentment is this unconscious desire to shift and change someone else. Often, what is attached to resentment is an inability or refusal to recognize your own suffering, and you're looking to someone else to save you from that. And so when folks say in the kind of pop psychology way, right, you have to forgive those so you can live your life, what they really mean is that you need to release this false belief that this person is going to save you from your feelings about them. And so I think a radical acceptance actually where you meet yourself where you are in your hurt and in your pain and you say, this is how I'm feeling. And this is why I'm feeling it. Is this someone that I can expect amends from? If not, I can accept that. This is how this person makes me feel. And the relationship might need to shift accordingly. But my forgiveness, my release of resentment in order to reconcile, to continue in a certain kind of relationship with this person, is something I reserve for those who I determine deserve it. And if I determine that that person don't deserve it, baby, there's other things I can do. I don't gotta forget them. I might do some altar work around it. I might take my pain and my suffering to my ancestors. I might do some other things that I won't discuss publicly. Or sometimes you got to get some revenge against people, right? But for me, how forgiveness functions in my life is I don't forgive someone unless I am willing to reconcile. Also, now that I don't practice Christianity anymore, it's really easy for me to understand that the good God does not exist outside of myself. And as my spirit is sovereign in my life, is sovereign over me, over my destiny, I can live in good character, iwapele, as an extension of myself. And so to bring an ancestral spiritual practice into our definition or understanding of forgiveness, I want to talk about Ifa Orisha tradition, the Isheshe tradition. And in this workbook by Dr. Ayele Kumari, Dr. Kumari lists the 16 core values of Ifa. And so before we transition to our testimony, I just want to share these core values. And you let me know if you hear forgiveness in the Western way that we've discussed as a core tenet of them. So Dr. Kumari identifies 16 core values of Ifa. First, there is one unifying intelligent source that expresses as all things to all people and through all of creation seen and unseen. We call it Olodumare. 2, we are all endowed with personal power and choices and must take full responsibility for our own actions. For every problem we encounter, there is a solution in that we have the power to effect positive change in our lives. 4, we each have a divine purpose and destiny. It is our responsibility to discover it and live in alignment with it in order to live our best life. At our core, we are spiritual beings inhabiting human bodies. Our divinity is manifest through an indwelling intelligence, our Ori, that is always connected to our source. We do not die, but continue as ancestors in the spiritual world and come back through reincarnation into our blood relatives. We live in a spiritual universe that is governed by universal laws that ensure divine order and balance. 8, character directly impacts our destiny. We must each do the internal work to cultivate integrity and honorable character in our lives. There is no real gain, joy, or peace from wrongdoing. Spiritual technologies such as therapeutic ritual, oracles, innate spiritual gifts, initiation, and indigenous medicines can be used to heal, empower, receive guidance, support, and insight in and for our lives. The universe is governed by primordial intelligences we call Irunmole and Orisha, who manifest as light and forces of nature. Our bodies are made of the same substances and therefore always connected. Earth is our mother, who provides all living beings food, water, clothing, medicine, shelter, and substance our entire lives. We are custodians of the earth and must respect the laws of nature. Good fortune in life can be attained through Ebo. We must give something of lesser value for something of greater value. The spiritual world and physical world are interconnected and interdependent. Nothing comes through the physical world without coming first through the spiritual. We are the sum total of our ancestors who came before and continue our relationships with them in the spiritual world through our ancestors and Egbe, our spiritual mates. The world is abundant and should be lived with joy and free of fear. Women must be respected. The only way we come to earth is through women. So our ancestors had an understanding of justice and good character. Forgiveness as a universal moral good does not enter the picture through our ancestral spiritual teachings. So again, Who does forgiveness serve? And how can we make the act of releasing resentment, right, serve us and the world building that we aim to do? So, with that, I'm shifting to our testimony. And today we are reading from Sisters of the Yam. We're reading our sister girl, Belliana Bell Hooks. And we thank her for her wisdom, her guidance. Today, we are reading from the chapter called The Joy of Reconciliation. And she's a Libra. So we're gonna take this with a grain of salt because we know, those of us who know, we know. Uh, but yeah, in my comedy routine, my first one that I did, I talked about Libras as being Libras. That's what I call them because they're always telling lies. And the Libra is the zodiac sign that's known for balance, for harmony. And so it says a lot that Bell Hooks takes time to talk about reconciliation. This particular essay on reconciliation is one in which she connects the act slash process of reconciliation with a sense of peacemaking. And at the core of it is releasing what she names as bitterness or resentment. She says to be at peace, Black women, especially those among us who have been deeply wounded and hurt, must release the bitterness we hold within us. Bitterness is like a poison. When it's inside us, it spreads even to the parts of the self that allow us to feel joy and spirit of celebration. Yet many of us choose to hold on to pain through the cultivation of bitterness and an unforgiving heart. Holding on to pain with bitterness may also be a way we hold on to our attachment to individuals who should no longer control our lives, but continue to do so because our bitterness lets them. For example, Black women in long term marriages with men who psychologically abuse them often become obsessed with remaining at the center of this negative drama. It's like, girl, I don't know, girl, it's kind of giving male centered, Belliana. Bitterness and hatred keep their negative connection to their partners alive, keep the drama happening, even though it is wounding. Each party clings to these feelings. When we remain unreconciled with those who have hurt us, it is usually a sign that we have not fully reconciled with ourselves. When we give ourselves love and peace, we can give these gifts to others. It's really impossible to live a life in love while hoping that harm and hurt will come to others. And this is where she takes off. And this is where she leaves me because I'm not going with her. Because, girl, what? Girl, what? Girl, girl, what? Like, what? She then takes a turn to talk about the history of Black folks' experience of suffering in the US, our collective history. And she says a sentence that really pisses me off. So I'm going to just read it. She says, throughout our history in the United States, Black people have suffered so much, and yet, collectively, at those historical moments when our suffering was most intense, we practiced the art of compassion and forgiveness. It seems that back then, wise Black elders knew that our inner peace, our capacity to know joy as a people, was intimately linked to our ability to let go of bitterness, to forgive. And so earlier we talked about the difference between forgiveness and condemnation, particularly that condemnation is the act of permitting or tolerating wrongdoing with the knowledge that that wrongdoing is wrong and that condemnation might be the way that we reframe or think about forgiveness that we lend to Black and non-Black people who commit wrongs. For Bell Hooks and possibly for others, there is this misguided belief that we as Black people cannot experience joy if we hold resentment towards those who oppress us for oppressing us, even as they make no apology or show no change behavior. She claims that is the wisdom of our elders. And This brings us back to the question that we've been asking all episode: who does forgiveness serve? If your forgiveness in the face of oppression allows your oppressor to not change, but gives you a sense of quote unquote peace, I don't know. That sounds like choosing oppression to me. But she goes so far as to say that the ability to hold this kind of forgiveness and wield this kind of compassion to those who cause you harm is a trait of elder Black women that we lost over time through our struggles for Black liberation. So I'll read here. This powerful legacy, handed down by generations of caring Black women, was undermined by contemporary Black liberation struggles that devalued these women's legacy. The inability of the 60s struggle for Black liberation to fundamentally transform this society by ending racism caused a lot of despair in the minds and hearts of Black people. I'm gonna keep going, but I just want to say, like, there's nothing like reading Darvo. Like, there's nothing like reading Darvo. Nothing like reading someone explicitly reverse victim offender, or we might hear say oppressed and oppressor here. Black people experience despair because our movement failed. No, Black people experience despair because white people did not meet the occasion of the grace and the forgiveness that niggas was offering them. But let me continue. Many of us ceased to hope that a real change would ever come. And there was a great welling up of bitterness and hatred toward white people, conservative and liberal alike, who showed themselves unwilling to divest of white supremacy and fully resist racism. That bitterness has lingered in the collective psyche of Black people and poisons our relationships with one another. Compelled by the desire to forge militant struggle against racist domination, many Black people felt we had to discard the idea that it was important to love one's enemies, to forgive. These values came to be seen by many as signs of weakness. Such thinking was fundamentally misguided. She then moves towards quoting a sermon of Martin Luther King Jr., who we all know had his own investments in desegregation, particularly his romantic and sexual relationships with non Black women, and his own investments with being an exceptional Black man who was so exceptional that he could transcend certain consequences of Blackness, i.e., segregation, separation from white people. But then Bell Hooks takes a really sharp dive off a cliff here, one that really pisses me off deeply, like grinds my gears. I literally wrote in the corner of the book, I'm like, girl, what the fuck? Like, girl, what the fuck? She says, it was uplifting to Black people's spirit to cultivate love. So we see here that for Bell Hooks, love and forgiveness are inextricable. She uses them not necessarily interchangeably, but they're like twins. They move closely together. It was uplifting to Black people's spirit to cultivate love, and by so doing, we nurtured our capacity to forgive and to be compassionate. Shutting the doors of the self that could be compassionate towards white people meant that we also shut the doors that would enable us to show compassion to each other. She then goes to explain what compassion is and what it does for her. She says that compassion is rooted in understanding. And she used the example of looking at her parents and thinking about how they suffered and endured. They didn't get the love and care that they needed. So she could not be angry at them for not doing what they needed to do for her, which is all well and good, girl. What the fuck does that got to do with white people? What the fuck that got to do with white people? I don't know. But she says, our capacity to forgive always allows us to be in touch with our own agency. That is, the power to act on our own behalf to change a situation. Enslaved Black people clearly understood the need to remain in touch with all those aspects of the self that enabled them to experience agency. Without agency, we collapse into passivity inertia, depression, and despair. And so she essentially argues that being able to forgive those who wrong you is an act of agency. That, again, that pop psychology, that therapeutic psychology, that Christian understanding of forgiveness, which is that forgiveness is for yourself. It allows you to be forgiven. It allows you to be free. It allows you to move outside of the constraints of these quote unquote negative emotions. But what if feeling resentment against someone who hates you is not a bad thing? What if that is actually a demonstration of your own personal power and autonomy? What if that is actually a demonstration of your self possessedness? To say, I turn away from this Greek that then turns into Judeo Christian, that then turns into a European worldview of this perfect, righteous God, this force outside myself that says I must forgive those who harm me. What if the reclaiming of my agency then is to say, no, I give my forgiveness to those who demonstrate that they can love me and show me a care, compassion, respect accordingly. I do not believe in indiscriminate and unconditional practice of love that does not value reciprocity is one that then brings us to a kind of forgiveness that leads us to liberation. How is, like, again, how is this not choosing oppression? I just want to know. I just want to know. But she continues. When Black women recover fully and exercise our will to be compassionate, to forgive, this will have a healing impact on Black life. The sexism of the 60s Black Power movement devalued the necessary life sustaining contributions Black women had made to liberation struggle. And this generated not only a lot of despair in Black women, but unexpressed rage. There are many Black women who hold within them intense anger towards Black men for not making life better for them. Certainly, these are the women who most internalize sexist assumptions that is that it is the male responsibility to maintain life and to provide. In reality, that responsibility is mutual and must be shared. So there's a lot happening in that paragraph. So many things to say. But again, these false equivalencies amid some truths, right? Of course, when we are able to exercise our will to be compassionate, to forgive, this will heal Black life. The sexism of the Black Power movement, however, how is it Black women's responsibility to forgive Black men for the way they respond to the demands of white supremacist anti-Black patriarchy? And so this goes back to what we've discussed in the previous segment. What does forgiveness do? Bell Hooks is making the argument that Black women need to forgive Black men for not being able to show up as providers, as that is a mutual caretaking of and responsibility for life is mutual, which is like, yeah, I'm with you there. But to say that we must change our thinking about Black men, our behaviors towards Black men, maybe perhaps even our judgments towards them, our obligation to them and to ourselves, without changed behavior apology or atonement from Black men for the physical, financial, potentially sexual, familial, economic consequences of sexism and patriarchy. I don't know, girl. It's not giving. The argument's not giving. And it's okay. One thing that I think about a lot is folks tend to think of the ancestors in the same way they think of Christian God, which is, you can't disagree or defy, or else you're not going to be accepted or loved by them. But I think it's actually okay for us to tussle with some of the things that our ancestors said and did. And not in that self loathing, I'm not my ancestors kind of way, because I would never say no shit like that. My ancestors did everything they could to bring me into this world, into this life. I would never deny them. But it's important to think about, right, what are the thought forms that shape how folks really demand Black women to forgive, how they demand Black women to release so much of our energy and our power in all these different ways for healing and reconciliation, while others don't make any moves to change or atone. Again, how is this different from a hegemonic experience of oppression? How is it not a spiritual bypassing? Or like, how is it not? Yeah. She continues. Compassion and forgiveness make reconciliation possible. Compassion combines the ability to empathize with another's distress and the will and desire to ease that distress. As Black women learn how to ease the distress that we feel, our ability to generously give to others, not as self sacrificing martyrs, will be strengthened. So, Bell Hooks says, right, compassion is what allows us to ease the distress of others. And she says, well, Black women, if you take your lack of ease on your own backs, you can start giving that shit to others. I'm sorry. Wow. I literally, again, girl, what? Girl, what? Like, and like, how is that not being a self sacrificing martyr? I don't understand that. We will then have no need to control and bind others to us by reminding them about what we have done on their behalf. Rather than seeing care as diminishing us, we will experience a kind of caregiving that enriches the giver. When we feel like martyrs, oof, the Libra is strong in this one. When we feel like martyrs, we cannot develop compassion. For compassion requires that we be able to stand outside ourselves and identify with someone else. It is fundamentally rooted in the ability to empathize. So then we move into the preacher hooks, preacher hookiana. And this is where things, I mean, we was already off the rails. We was already off the rails, jumped off the cliff, all of that. But this is where it gets a little gospely. And she talks about forgiveness in this way that honestly frightens me a little bit. She says, individually, when we practice forgiveness in our lives, we cleanse our spirit of negative clutter and leave our souls free. As Arnold and Barry Fox suggest in Wake Up, You're Alive, quote, forgiveness is a glorious feeling that sets you free. But even if you already have the feeling of forgiveness inside of you, you must still say the words, I forgive you, out loud. This is vital. The words are, in a sense, an affirmation with hidden meaning. Forgiveness instructs your subconscious to banish negative feelings from your mind. When you say, I forgive you to someone, you are also saying, I want to be healthy to yourself. Honestly, I don't even know if I can comment on that. So she says, genuine desire to change our world by cultivating compassion and the will to forgive should make us more able to vigilantly resist oppression and exploitation, to joyfully engage in oppositional struggle. I know that there are those among us who worry that being too forgiving will somehow diminish our ability to sustain resistance. Again, I think it's important that we remember that forgiveness does not mean that we cease to assertively identify wrongs, hold others to account, and demand justice. And so she has this understanding of forgiveness as one in which you don't forget that someone has wronged you, but then you do what exactly? It is because we can practice forgiveness and be transformed that we have the compassion and insight to see that the same is true for those who might appear as enemies. This is the true realization of justice, that we want what is peaceful and life sustaining for all and not just for ourselves. And so, this gesture towards the universal, I think she really illustrates how that is a tool of white supremacy, just in that sentence. And I'm going to talk more about the universal, its connection to white supremacist thought, its connection to Judeo Christian values in a future episode. But just there, a peaceful world for all requires an inordinate amount of work and forgiveness from those who are the most oppressed. Because again, we have no account of what those who are, and she puts enemies in air quotes as if it's not a real, actual, factual, motherfucking, death dealing ass shit. I don't know. And maybe it's also because she's light skinned. I just feel like there's so much harm that comes when we believe that this kind of forgiveness is a path to freedom, path to liberation, path to community. What the fuck do I look like being anything but a menace to someone who wants to kill me? Why would I participate in my own destruction unless I too have swallowed self loathing so much that I consider it to be integral to my being? She tells us she does forgiveness meditations in the next paragraph, where she sits peacefully and think about who hurts her and how she feels, and then tells them that she forgives them. We actually have a counter practice to that at the end of the episode, in case you're wondering. But what she says that then is truly, truly, truly troubling to me is this. Most of us who have been abused know that it is a healing moment when you are able to name to that person that you forgive them, or if they seek forgiveness, you respond with regard and compassion. Sometimes this generous act makes reconciliation possible. Often, when folks wrong us, they engage in self punishment by no longer allowing themselves to experience our love and care. They may feel unworthy of our kindness. Forgiveness enables the restoration of mutual harmony. We can both start over again on equal footing, no longer separated by whatever wrong occurred. As someone who walks in a practice of just deliberately not forgiving those who abuse me and harm me, saying that forgiveness is purely for those who demonstrate that they deserve it, I'm deeply troubled by the assertion that a certain kind of ascension, emotional goodness, moral goodness, purity, freedom comes from being able to forgive those who abuse us, which means they engage in a sustained pattern of behavior that destroys our bodily integrity, the integrity of our spirit, body, mind. Who does that serve? To reconcile with someone who has abused you? Who does that serve? To release resentment, anger, rage towards that person or that institution? She talks about forgiving her sister. And yeah, by all means, girl, do you. But she ends this chapter, this essay, with this. We have to forgive with our whole hearts. If we forgive in words but continue to harbor secret resentment, nothing really changes. When forgiveness happens, when there is compassion, the groundwork for reconciliation is possible. For me, that is the ultimate joy. That we learn that there are no broken bonds that cannot be mended, no pain that cannot be assuaged. Like I said, yeah, I'm gonna tussle with you. I'm gonna tussle with you on that one, Belliana, because I'm not quite sure that my ancestors, past versions of myself, that were raped, beaten, stolen from their land, uh, forced to work, forced to shift the geography, the literal or topography or whatever you call it, like of the land of the United States. Those who were forced to move from where they lived in Turtle Island to another small patch of land that was reserved for them. I'm not exactly sure if that pain can be released through forgiveness. I think forgiveness in the face of abuse, forgiveness in the face of oppression, forgiveness of our enemies actually requires silence and self abandonment. And so we're not going to be rocking with that sense of forgiveness, at least not here. You get to determine for yourself what forgiveness looks like. But one thing that I really wanted to help kind of illustrate, right, what this kind of forgiveness does and the impact that it has on communities, particularly Black communities, us among ourselves. One example that I watched recently when I was getting my hair retightened a few week ago, my law teacher was like, "Girl, you gotta watch this." And then she was like, "Go ahead and put on Netflix." And we put on The Polygamist. If you have not seen The Polygamist, it is a South African drama that is on Netflix. It's it's really fast paced. When I tell you it moves like lightning, it say it got 23 episodes or something like 22 episodes, but they're each like 23, 24 minutes. They move like that. And they had to, because if they dragged them out like the Nigerian movies, I would have been fighting for my life. But because I feel like in Nollywood, they be dragging it. But this, it moves so quick. And when I tell you, I'm about to spoil it. I'm about to spoil it and talking about this too. So if you haven't seen it yet and you care about spoilers, just skip to the next part and then come back and listen. But basically, something that I was thinking and watching it. So there is this, the story is told mostly from the viewpoint of the wife, I Joyce. She's kind of at the main point of view ish of the story. The story shifts point of views multiple times, but she's married and she's a darker skinned woman. She's married to this lighter skinned man named Jonas. Jonas is, when we enter the scene, he dead. Jonas dead. She over his casket. Like, if you had listened to me, bitch, you would still be alive, motherfucker. Like, she going in on this man in his casket. And you like, girl, what he did. So then they move into the story, and turns out this man did everything a motherfucking narcissistic sociopath can do. And he was able to do it because everyone around him enabled him to do it. He was able to do it because people continued to practice forgiveness and condemnation. They continued to practice forgiveness and reconciliation with him. Every time he cheated on Joyce and she discovered it, she more or less forgave him to the end, right? She said, "Oh, well, I got to keep up appearances, right? I got to let people know I'm a loved woman for my brand deals. I got to let people know I'm a loved woman because, God, I'm a loved woman, or right?" When he cheats on her with someone at the job and they form a long-term relationship, he gets her pregnant. I can forgive, I can forgive, I can forgive. She continuously blames the other woman, says, leave him alone. The other woman is like, bitch, we in love with the same man and he loved me more than you. So we just gonna keep fighting. And then you think it's just them two. Then lo and behold, you find out that his niece is his daughter. And his niece is his daughter, and I'm laughing because how you find out is just so, like, this show is so, nobody does drama like folks on the continent. I'm sorry, nobody does drama like folks on the continent. Like, I applaud y'all because the fuck, like, you find out his niece is actually his daughter because he coerced his brother into claiming one of his wives, and he's still fucking everybody. He's still sleeping with everybody. The brother and spent the last 20 years pretending to be married to this woman, ain't have no life of his own, enabling his brother and his mess because of money. I mean, capitalism always is the villain. This movie also just really illustrates that every villain is light skinned, or not movie, the show illustrates that every villain is light skinned, like ridiculous. Then you find out, okay, wife one, wife two, wife three, this nigga's also a pedophile. So then there's, you know, he has a relationship with his daughter's best friend, and everybody's having babies or getting pregnant. He turns physically abusive. Like there's just everything happens. And it's not until, he's done this damage for over 2 decades that people start to wise up and say, "Oh wait, we don't actually have to reconcile with this nigga. We actually don't have to forgive this nigga. He's not going to change." It's like this preemptive forgiveness. Like maybe if I give him another chance, he'll change. And I think that's what so many of us do in our lives with folks who have these kind of behavioral patterns, folks who are truly destructive to community and to our own sense of integrity, our own sense of bodily integrity, but spiritual integrity. Like we convince ourselves that the best thing to do is to release resentment and hope that they rise to the occasion. What if we allowed these niggas, especially, to rise to the occasion first before we release resentment against them? What if my resentment actually doesn't poison me? It protects me. What if the Christian psychobabble of it all actually is what leads me to my own destruction, the acceptance and the perpetuation of my own oppression? This also makes me think about something that I read in an email from a friend had forwarded me an email from Nedra Tawwab. She's like a really popular psychologist on social media. In the email, she talks about working with her Black woman clients who are mothers. And she says that she had to, despite how uncomfortable it made her, supposedly, or whatever, I'm not even putting no words in her mouth. She said that she had to teach these women that they needed to forgive the men who molested their children in order to, I guess, in the bell hooks of sense, be free from the resentment, from the self blame. I don't know. It's a bit disturbing when we take forgiveness to the extreme, by which we can allow those who hold patriarchal or race, gender, really any form of identity, like power within that, the ability to not face the consequences of their actions. Why would I want to release the resentment towards someone who harmed my child? Why wouldn't I want that to be, it don't gotta be a cornerstone of my life, sure. But why wouldn't I want that to be a feeling I hold over someone who caused harm to my child? What makes me morally superior than anyone else to forgive a child molester? And is that moral superiority only connected to a Euro Christian worldview? Like that's what's gonna get me to heaven. Why would I want to go to heaven if that means I gotta forgive a child molester? I don't know. Is he gonna be in heaven too? Are the children in heaven safe? I'm sorry, that was a little dark, but it just I just can't. I can't. I can't. I can't. I can't. I just think that we will be better served thinking like June Jordan and declaring that we should be a menace to our enemies. People should not be able to sleep at night when they do shit like that. And if we really real, they shouldn't be breathing. But, that's between me and you, right? We might be better served thinking in the vein of Asada Shakur, who reminds us that only a fool lets someone else determine who their enemies are. We can extend that and say only a fool lets someone else determine who their enemies are not. And so you might then in your own self-determination, choose how you define an enemy. You might define an enemy as someone whose thoughts, behaviors, words, and actions hinder your growth and progress, or even your very living. They might be someone who does that for someone you love and care for. You might also decide that your enemy is also your oppressor. There might be people in your life who make themselves your enemy, right? But they can't even step to you for real, which is probably most of your haters. But the bottom line is that you get to decide whether they deserve your forgiveness, and you get to decide what that forgiveness looks like. Your liberation depends on it. Keep in mind that if you can always justify others' behaviors and then release your resentment, and or you can forgive them but have a hard time forgiving yourself, which here I'm meaning releasing yourself from blame and judgment, reframing the way that you think about yourself, then it's essential to build a self-forgiveness practice where you adjust the emotions that you feel, the judgments you have, and the behaviors that you enact against yourself. If this is something that you struggle with, please seek support, whether that support be spiritual, therapeutic, etc. Perhaps the journey for some of you is not, how do I release resentment against my mother who abandoned me, or my father who was never there? How do I release resentment against those who betray me? But rather, the journey is, how do I release resentment against myself? The responsibility to take on the shame that those who have harmed me should feel. That's tough work. That is tough work in a world that is built upon power and domination. In this world that is built upon power and domination, having power and being able to dominate is seen as good. Thus, to be dominated and to be powerless is seen as bad. But as we say here on the podcast often, there is no shame in being hurt. That shame belongs to those who hurt you. And so the process of self-forgiveness, acknowledging that you are worthy of your own good love and care, releasing yourself from the burden of blame and judgment, is the work of self-forgiveness. Self-forgiveness allows us to escape so many of the ways that abuse traps us. Self-forgiveness allows us to exit certain cycles of entrapment because we don't do our oppressor's work of finding reason in why we belong in the situation. This was particularly helpful for me as I began to heal from different forms of abuse from my childhood, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, narcissistic abuse in particular. And so my first therapist gave me a hard talk around self-forgiveness because that was something that I really, really struggled with. Self-forgiveness was the way to refuse a life staked in self-betrayal. As Jack Cornfield says, forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past. In this sense, forgiveness is really not about someone's harmful behavior. It's about our own relationship with our past. When we begin the work of forgiveness, it is primarily a practice for ourselves. So if we think about what I said earlier and thinking about what radical acceptance looks like, it's an acceptance that the things that have happened can't and won't change, an acceptance that you won't receive what you have needed from that person and what you might need from them in the future if there's someone who's not willing to apologize and change. But what forgiveness does is that it releases us from the power of fear and allows us to see kindly with a wise heart. It does not gloss over what has happened in a superficial way. The practice is not about planting a smile on our face and saying, "It's okay, I don't mind." Our ability to forgive allows us to make space for our ability to meet suffering, our suffering as well as the suffering of others, with a kind heart. Forgiveness is not a misguided effort to suppress our pain or to ignore it. If you suffered a great injustice, coming to forgiveness might include a long process of grief and outrage and sadness and pain. Forgiveness is a deep process, which is repeated over and over and over again in our hearts. It honors the grief and it honors the betrayal. And in its own time, it ripens into the freedom to truly forgive. And the other exercise that you might try is to write out at your altar space all the ways that other people had you fucked up. Let it all out. Then go through and make a conscious choice. Do I forgive them? Because again, we're not doing that compulsive forgiveness that's required to get into heaven or into Bell Hooks community. We're not doing that, right? We acting in our agency for real. We acting in our self-determinacy for real. And we saying, okay, do I forget this motherfucker or not? Right? If so, what does it look like? And why? Am I changing in my thoughts towards this person? Am I changing in my behavior towards this person? Do I think of this person differently? What is the contour of my forgiveness towards this nigga if I'm choosing to forgive them or non nigga? If I'm choosing to forgive them. If the reason for forgiveness comes from some moral standard outside yourself, you might consider why you need to go outside yourself to justify your choice. For example, one of the few people that I have practiced forgiveness in my life, and I know it's kind of, I say that I'm like, ew, hopefully people don't think I'm some spiteful person, but one of the few times that I can name explicitly that I forgave someone is with my father. I made the conscious choice to forgive my father when I was 20 for his absence in my life, for his abandonment. And I did that because I desired to have a relationship with him. I wanted to reconcile. I wanted to experience what it would be like to have him in my life because I did not know him. And that didn't mean that I didn't ask him about it or confront him about his choices. Didn't mean that we didn't have conversations about his choice not to be a part of my life for a considerable amount of my life. But we had a relationship and it was the closest that I had to a parental relationship. And so I cherish that. My father showed up for me as a father who's been missing for the first 20 years of your life could do, right? He taught me a lot in the years that we had together until he passed when I was 28. And for me, right, that choice to forgive him was not because God said I had to, it was quite literally because I wanted to have a relationship with him. And I didn't want that relationship to be strained by the past, essentially. And so for me, right, forgiveness looks like releasing resentment to move towards reconciliation. If I don't desire to have a relationship with someone in my life, I don't forgive them. I accept and I release. And I hold on to whatever negative feelings I got. I release them in other ways, but I don't, there's no sense of restoration there for me. But that's just me. You get to decide for yourself what that looks like. For folks who had you fucked up and you can't speak directly to them, because I do recommend, if you can speak directly to someone who had you fucked up, do so. Get that energy about your body. That's like the quickest form of a reversal when it comes to like certain feelings around shame and guilt, just go ahead and let them know, oh no, you got me fucked up. Yeah, up front. But if you can't do that, then you might get you a glass of water. You might sprinkle some salt in it, sea salt if you got it, and get in that water and you cuss them the fuck out. Ike the fuck out. Cuss them the fuck out. Get that stagnant energy, that stagnating energy of silence and swallowing your pain up out your body, and allow the water that holds all memory to hold it. Then flush it down the toilet. Do that as many times as you need to till you feel like that energy has moved up out of you. You could do an altar practice where you give your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions to your ancestors and your spirit guides. You write it out, you speak it out, you say, hey, y'all, this is too much for me to hold. I can't live my life thinking this way, being this way. I'm going to let y'all have it. Allow them to have it. They can bear that burden with you. I have a specific altar practice for my enemies because I cannot hex people, so I cannot advise on how to do that. It's literally, I'll get myself in trouble karmically if I hex people. But if you have the capacity, somebody got you fucked up, and you have the capacity and the ability to speak directly to and about those who've harmed you, do so. Sometimes you don't gotta hex nobody. Sometimes all you gotta do is just tell them how they got you fucked up, or you could tell somebody else how they got you fucked up. You can work with things in the physical before you got to go to the spiritual. Or you might just have to get your lick back. And I'm not advising you to do that. But if you can and you're able to do so, honey, Seven of Swords is up. Get your lick back. And once you've done that practice with others, it might make it a bit easier to do this with yourself. You want to think about the things that you've said and done that you hold over yourself. What are the ways that you resent yourself? What are the ways that you might deny and thus be the cause of your own suffering? Make a conscious choice to forgive yourself for all of it. You might have to take it bit by bit, piece by piece. You might even choose a behavior, an action, or judgment to replace that resentment, blame, and other negative emotions and behavior associated with that, right? So let's say, you need to forgive yourself for not getting up at the time that you planned in the morning to go do whatever it is you need to do. And you hold a lot of resentment. You think of yourself as someone who is inconsistent or incapable because of that. Well, it might feel differently. Life might feel better. You might feel more free. Releasing that blame and saying something akin to, I deserve my own loving kindness. I want to release myself from the burden of carrying shame, resentment, anger towards myself that prevents me from doing or being or loving. You want to be sure to ask yourself why you are forgiving yourself for a particular thing. And you want to root that reason in yourself, right? I'm forgiving myself for XYZ because I deserve my own loving kindness, because I no longer want to fear the power of my words. Rooted in yourself and your own self power. If there are specific relationships and decisions that you've made that you have to forgive yourself for, you might consider writing a letter to yourself where you give that version of yourself what you needed and wanted at the time that caused you to make a decision of self betrayal. You want to make these new commitments to forgive yourself first, right? Don't list all your wrongdoings and be like, bitch, you really fucked up when you gave that nigga head in the backseat of the car. I don't know. Whatever. That was so weird. I don't know why my mind went there because I've never done that. But that might be something you might need to forgive yourself for. You don't want to reprimand yourself or talk down on yourself. You want to show yourself forgiveness first. Give yourself what you need first. You most likely have reprimanded yourself enough. And so I'll share with you a letter that I wrote a younger version of myself recently as an example. And this is how we'll close the episode today. Dear baby Brendane, I'm willing to scorch the earth for you, burn bridges for you, give you the revenge you told yourself you weren't entitled to because of what they've taken and what they told you you are owed. I love you. Yeah, I know. You tried to squeeze love out of a hard place. I know it hurts again to see the love that you thought was shared, was yours, circulated. This is a testament to how big your love is, nothing else. In the time since then, you've poured your love back into yourself. You found a plethora of ways to capture yourself and see beauty. Brendane, don't worry. It gets better even if it doesn't get less painful. You start working with your hands and your head. You value the beauty in your black face. Don't worry. I'm reaching through to you through the vortex and I'm bringing you all the comfort and ease you need. I promise that you will find love that insulates from life's chaos. You already have so much of it. Your friends, the lovers that you will encounter after you dedicate yourself to yourself ruthlessly. I say this with all the disrespect. Fuck that nigga. And fuck the others too. Fuck anybody who would look at you in your pain and tell you you aren't enough, but somehow also to blame. Fuck them. What else could have been the outcome of the ways you were forced to sacrifice as a child? What else could have been the outcome? What else could have been the outcome? How could you have known how to love yourself when you had no example? Generations of women who gave their lives for men and children who made scraps of care and cathexis love. Your first lessons as a Black girl child were that you were seen and cared for when you were quiet and useful. You developed a personality around that and shoved the most creative, tender, and rageful parts of yourself down. That fruit grew plentifully, but the ground was poisoned, so I have to scorch the earth for you. Burn everything that would prevent you from reaching our destiny. I have to scorch the earth for you and make sure that anything left standing is in your highest good. I will scorch the earth for you, and this time we will step out of the way of others' falling towers. We will no longer shield them from the consequences of their actions, Brendane. With self forgiveness and self compassion, you grow into the woman you've always wanted to be. It takes you years to fully commit to transforming your life, to abandoning those old thought forms that had you in cycles of self doubt, self pity, and self sabotage. It takes a few more ancient lovers for you to feel just how urgently you need to take your life back. But I assure you, you will be able to look in the mirror again and love what you see. You won't deny yourself pleasure by lying to yourself about the cost of martyrdom. You will leave the needy, broke, clinically unwell, narcissistic, abusive, scamming, lying, cheating, psychopathic, sociopathic ass niggas where they at. You learn that all love develops in time. That anybody who rushes you is trying to move you into a pace where you are unable to connect with yourself. You learn to prioritize your own feelings and wants and needs above others. You refuse to forgive or to forget because you know the way forgiveness reinforces oppression. You no longer choose oppression. You speak your mind and guard your heart. You radiate a beauty and love that is unparalleled. Baby girl, ain't nobody fucking with you. Well, thank you for taking the time to listen. That is all I have for you all today. I hope this episode helps you gather the tools and mindsets necessary to practice forgiveness on your own terms and in opposition to oppression. I want to express my deepest gratitude to my elevated ancestors, my spirit guides, to the Most High God for giving me the inspiration and fortitude to do this work. I do not take it lightly. If you would like to join the Black Love Free Project team, please reach out via email at blacklovedandfreepodcast@gmail.com. I'm looking for somebody. Just kidding. I'm looking for someone who is organized and passionate about Black feminism, anarchy, and resistance, just to help me with a bit of the internal operations and administration here. So, if this sounds like you, please feel free to reach out. And if you want to keep up with future episodes, you can follow us on Instagram at black.loved.free. Be sure to subscribe to our Patreon and to our YouTube because we got some new YouTube videos coming soon. Be sure to give us 5 stars and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps us reach other listeners. And if you're listening on Spotify, leave us a comment to let us know what you think of the episode. If this episode touched you or made you think differently about something, send it to a friend and let us know. Send us an email. But drop it in the DMs. If you are looking for personalized guidance for your own journey in ruthless self devotion, I'm opening up a transformative group container that starts in November. Essentially, we'll be moving together through work that will help you integrate your spiritual, political, and creative practice through the process and practice of ruthless self devotion. So, if that's something that you're interested in, you can sign up for a call with me using the link in the description. And lastly, may you find a sacred, soft place to care for yourself and for each other. May you radiate in the truth that you are the one who saves you. And may you find the strength to be Black, loved, and free. Until next time.